Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Koza, to excuse the pun, but can you shed light for us on the question of whether men's cricket subsidizes, or the revenue generated by men's cricket subsidizes women's cricket, vice versa, or you in a situation where the revenue generated by men's cricket is sufficient to cover all the costs for men's cricket, and similarly the revenue generated by women's cricket is sufficient to cover the costs for all of the women's cricket expenses?
Chair, where we find ourselves is that we're heavily dependent on the Protea income that is generated through the Proteas. When you look at our strategy, it speaks for itself. We want to be in the top 3 of world cricket because that's where you find that now most of the nation wants to play against you, because that's more or less our cash cow. So the Protea main income through broadcast and everything else actually subsidizes women's cricket, and let alone the development of the game in the country.
Then, Mr. Koza, I take you to paragraph 75 and 76 of your statement, where you talk about additional measures that were introduced by CSA in order to professionalize women's cricket. Please take us through that.
Correct, Chair. I think where I need to start is also around the Women's Super League, and this was before we went to the 2019 T20 World Cup. Because like I said, when you have 14 contracted players, it also leaves a gap with the next generation of cricketers. So luckily at the time we had the national team contracted, producing certain level of results, and then the next year was the academy squad. But also you had young fringe provincial players that were actually putting their hands up. And what we did at the time, we started what we call the Women's Super League, which like is a T20 competition amongst 4 selected sides, which also include our national players actually spread out into teams. The sole purpose for that is, one, to give the coaches and the selectors a bit of an in-depth eye on the talent that we have as a country. Because remember, the current resources of our national team can only take us to a point, and we need to make sure that we have depth in terms of that aspect. So the Women's Super League was earmarked to make sure that it can close the gap. But let alone, when we do that, we also looked at the empowerment of coaches as well as female umpires. Because what we've done as well is that we've strictly made this a women's affair. So the teams are coached by female, and then we'll have coaching managers supporting these females wherever the gaps could be. But it's an empowerment program for us. And then what also, which is quite significant, is the SA Under 19. So where we come from in the past year was, and this is leading up to the year 2020, and I'm speaking on this from an ICC perspective. There was never an Under 19 competition for women. So you go to an Under 19 Girls Week, where the provinces are playing each other. There will be 2 teams that will be selected, and those 2 teams will play a once-off fixture. And then those players will be capped as a SA Lilies team, and they will be given caps and their recognition. But that's where it ended. They never get exposure for international cricket. And through our strides of trying to improve women's cricket globally, ICC wanted to start an ICC Under 19 T20 World Cup. And because of the strides that we've made as Cricket South Africa, we guaranteed a spot in there. And hence we needed to ensure that we have a program actually just on top of just the National Week. So what we started is also a talent acceleration program to try and make sure that by the time we're ready, because this World Cup was originally going to take place in 2021, but due to COVID and the nature of where women's cricket finds itself, it was actually backdated to 2023. But our efforts as Cricket South Africa cannot wait for 2023. We started with that in the immediate effect by making sure that the identification of talent and having programs that can support the talent is there and speaks for itself. I think post-COVID, which is something that we never anticipated, there was also a dry need for content for broadcasters. And that's where the first match, when we got back into international cricket, the women haven't played anything for over a year. We actually had a series against Pakistan, which took place in Durban and Maritzburg. We had ODI matches as well as T20 cricket. The issue which was also earmarked there, we also made a significant improvement. As the men have the pink day, we actually started the concept there of Black Day. And this was a stance against gender-based violence. And we used this avenue to try and make sure that we can also make sure that we have women having their day, similarly to what we've well-renowned ping day that we have within the main setup. And funny enough, the broadcast managed to come on board for that. And it's always the approach is we have space available, and then we want to broadcast this match, and that's where it ends. It's not like a revenue-generated issue. Where we quite happy as Cricket South Africa to say, hang on, here is an opportunity for us, for these young ladies to be seen out there and give aspirations to young cricketers actually, because sometimes the TV reaches greater eyes than what some of the coaches and everybody else could do. And in that as well, we had a significant milestone. I mean, we had the lady Chandra Frets. Chandra was a former Protea player under Zola Tamai's management at the time. She played at the time where there was no contracts. And for us as Cricket South Africa, putting her in the match official space, grooming her to be actually a match referee, was also a significant milestone in that event. And let alone, we were actually quite blessed as well that we had Lauren Achenbach, who actually was the first female match official to actually from South Africa to go and officiate at the World Cup. So at the World Cup in 2019, she also represented us there. And then when you look at provincial, because you're only as good as also your base. As much as we try and improve the national team, as much as we try and make sure that we improve the national academy, those are limited resources. Because if you truly want to broaden the base and make sure that you capitalize on your resources, the provincial teams became a significant issue. And so now normally our provinces are different strengths. So some of them have been significantly better positioned to produce players for us, but there are those that you find that they're showing the right signs. And when I speak about this, for example, I'll speak about an area, Kai, which the head office is at the Kai Majola in Umtata. When you look at Kai, for example, at the under-19 national weeks at provincial level, you could see that this player, something good is happening in Kai. And down the line, we probably will be tapping into these resources coming into the fore. What was also significant for us there was to say, now hang on, when you lose a contract at national level, you come back to nothing. And that doesn't add value to where we're sitting. So we needed to come up with a process to say, now how are we going to counter that? Because, and especially this was significantly damaging under COVID. Because I think our first player to have actually lost a contract was back in 2016, which was a black African cricketer, Marshall Itswalo, who's currently sitting in the CSA office administration. Because Marshall was actually a person that lost out on income, because by the time these other ones got bump ups and everything, she had to be phased out. And at the time we gave an intern opportunity for her, and she scrapped it, and she's the current administrator within the Cricket Services Department. But coming to this point is that when the interim board was in charge of CSA, we went and engaged with them and said, now we need to do something here, because COVID is exposing us. I mean, the next batch of players that lost their contract were exposed here. I mean, we had a player who actually was an off spinner. She got cited for suspect bowling action, and so she didn't play that much. That meant she doesn't have the numbers to actually retain a contract, and also because she cannot bowl internationally before she gets cleared. It became a problem. So now that player lost a contract, and we had to say, hang on, this is someone that can add value down the line. If we let her go, we're probably going to lose her on the street. So what we did at the time, we actually used what we call a player performance plan, which is a money that more or less I'll speak about it later on. But we had to make a social economic intervention on her, and we collaborated this with SACA at the time so that she could have a salary until at the time where you find that we're saying she's ready again to resume her international career. But the issue which is very vital was to also say now, we cannot just rely on these ad hoc issues. We need to formalize the process. So when we went and saw the interim board, we said we need money to be able to ensure that we can contract the players. And they gave us their blessing. We're actually contracting 40 players. 10 will be contracts which will be offered under the high performance environment, which means it's the 14 Protea contracts, the 10 high performance contract, and then the next year will be 30 contracts which will be offered at member level to provincial cricketers. Because at the end of the day, that will increase our significant pool of contracted players in terms of where we are. But this is a semi-professionalized structure. From where I'm sitting, if this results in the right way, we probably will get to a point where one day we can actually professionalize women's cricket.
And you say all of that is happening in Mthatha?
Excuse me, sir?
Are you saying all of this is development in Mthatha?
No, when I was referring to Mthatha, I was speaking about the progress of young girls at school level that were
Okay.
progressing.
All right.
And so the talent identification of them, when you pick them up and you don't have a program like the player performance plan to attain to their socio-economic needs to close the performance gap becomes an issue. So by the time they graduate to a level of high performance or whatever, they cannot sustain themselves if there's no contract structure.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Koza, during these hearings, various witnesses have indicated that CSA has a transformation policy and a transformation committee, but neither the policy nor the committee is effective. Over and above that, there has been CSA's own transformation manager that gave evidence, and I understand that during his evidence he indicated that CSA has spectacularly failed in its transformation efforts. You deal from paragraph 79 to 93 with the question of the transformation structures and what has been put in place. I want you to comment on the notion that CSA has spectacularly failed in its transformation efforts, and then just take us through the various structures that have been put in place.
Thanks, Chair. I think for that, I think one needs to acknowledge from the onset that we definitely have a painful past. And we have to take that into consideration. And transformation has always been one of the strategic pillars of Cricket South Africa. And definitely, diversity is our strength. And we need to make sure that we maximize on that. When you look at the recent issues, before I get into the process here of transformation and speaking about the various committees and all that, allow me to speak from a CSA philosophy and plan perspective. Because sometimes we tend to limit transformation sometimes to just a numbers game or color. If I had to quote, transformation is the response of an organization to the changing demands in the market that they serve. In there, it highlights three issues, and this isn't the CSA issue. It speaks about sustainability, it speaks about relevance, it speaks about competitive edge. Chair, let me just entertain you just once on these three aspects. If we speak sustainability of the game, you can't do that if you don't give the majority access. When I speak about the majority, I'm speaking about the black people. So now, all the efforts that we've made, and when I start speaking about programs, and we have to take cognizance about the long-term strategy and the short-term strategy in terms of sustaining the pipeline. Because sustainability is paramount importance, because this speaks to relevance in the market. Because, I mean, it's painful when you see, for example, in a game when we played against Australia, when you see, for example, a photo being branded around. One thing that we tend to ignore under relevance, the South African public, they live off major events. So we might think in between the series or the 4-year period, we as Cricket South Africa has a small number of portion of people that probably would follow and have relevance to cricket. But come major event, the 56 million people come alive. And they have a say in what's happening to cricket. And we must ask ourselves that relevancy, are we relevant to all of them? And unfortunately, sometimes when you in the setup like I am, I'm in a leadership position, Chair. And I'm not happy with the state of the game where it finds us all. And I see myself as accountably responsible for where the game finds itself. And one needs to take this moment and also apologize to the public out there that this is not the Cricket South Africa that we're building. Because it will be false of us if we try and fool ourselves and say we're relevant. Because that doesn't speak to the transformation aspect. What I want to also add to the process is the issue around sound leadership as well as education. Because as much as we deal with diverse systems, we also need to make sure that we're educating people within the system. I cannot just anticipate, Chair, that when you work through that door, you understand the goals and objectives of Cricket South Africa. I need to take you through an induction process. You need to ask me questions and say, why, Edward, are we doing this? What are the results of this? Because the key issue here, as much as we will see that when you look at the history of Cricket South Africa, come World Cup, the heartbeat goes up. The comments are more. And the issue is there is a level of opportunity for us to capitalize on. And we must make ourselves relevant to the stakeholders. And I think probably maybe Mr. Yojan's comments of Cricket South Africa coming short, he might be highlighting around the relevancy thereof. And the issue which is very important is that we are definitely in a competitive environment. When that cricket ball comes, it doesn't check whether you've been previously disadvantaged or you are coming from a well-off family. That competitive edge revolves around how we prepare our players. Because collectively as coaches, administrators and all that, irrespective of the players' backgrounds and their shortcomings, it's our point to make sure that we have their gaps, if there's any, in terms of making sure that they can perform, that we can close those gaps. Because that will keep us in a competitive edge against our counterparts, because we're not getting measured about South Africa versus South Africa. We get measured by world standards. And that world standards we can't say when we're not achieving. And we come back to the issue of the transformation part. We need to look at our processes and everything that goes with it.
Yeah. Okay. Can you expand on that? Competition and transformation. Where is the problem there?
No, I'm saying when I say when you wanna select a diverse team, because remember you need to be relevant. We cannot use an excuse and say we cannot select a diverse team because of we don't have a certain race to select from. So now, as our collectively, as a cricket ecosystem, it's our moral responsibility to ensure that all our efforts and intentional aspects that we can be able to make sure that we broaden our base. Because historically, when you look at the Protea selections, you'll see that we're producing bowlers in abundance. But looking at the dynamics and everything else of selecting a cricketing team, you need other skill sets. And the issue which is very vital is that now we need to make sure that collectively we're broadening the base. And you'll see when I start speaking about the programs, about the efforts that we're putting in place to try and make sure, and not now, it's something that goes back from 2015 to try and change the long-term picture and bring that sustainability, relevance, and competitive edge. Where we failed also is probably telling our stories in terms of where we are at every juncture of our journey so that we can account to the stakeholders and the public.
I want to be clear and sure that I understand you. You are not for a moment suggesting that if you are transforming, then you won't be competitive.
No.
Okay.
Mr. Khoza, I think we need to get into the heart of the initiatives that CSA has been involved in.
Yeah.
And I think you've been leading some of those initiatives. And you deal with some of that in your statement from about paragraph 80.
Yeah.
Please take us through that.
I think before we move to that, I must also highlight the role of the Transformation Committee of CSA. The Transformation Committee is always led by the chairman, someone from the board perspective. So now normally when a board is elected, they will allocate themselves in terms of areas of responsibility and strength to lead these environments. So transformation is also one of those key, the Transformation Committee, a key monitoring tool within CSA. So now, when it comes to accountability as cricket officials, we both account to the Cricket Committee and the Pipeline Committee, but most importantly to the Transformation Committee. I cannot go to the Transformation Committee chair and start fiddling around and say there's 2 black African players coming through, and there's no names, performances, and all those type of issues that boost that avenue, or there's no interventions in terms of that aspect. So they are an oversight to CSA, and it's quite a critical aspect to this. Maybe when you look at the cricket ecosystem and also contributes to where our shortcomings are, is that some of our members don't even have those transformation committees at their level. And cricket is also played at their level. So if one of the improvements when we move away from this, I've learned a lot from this aspect. Because that's one of the key issues that we probably have to genuinely go around and say, hang on, we need to establish these committees. Because, you know, for us as cricketing people, and I'll speak in this room because Corey is here in the room with me, we could probably level-headedly speak about certain things. But if there's no oversight of Mr. July, we might overlook certain issues. And it's quite important that we don't approach these committees as a tick box exercise. They need to be held accountable. If we want to take South African cricket forward, we need to make sure that these structures are all in place and they're equally accountable, vice versa, top down and cross surfaces. Because this game is not about Cricket South Africa and the members. It's about the greater stakeholders out there.
Mr. Khoza, you speak about holding people accountable and holding the Transformation Committee accountable. But presumably the committee needs to have powers so that you can then hold them accountable as to whether they're exercising those powers.
Correct.
Does the committee have powers?
Most definitely, they have a terms of reference which actually set out their mandate. And what is very important as well, over a 5-year period, they will have an engagement with the greater stakeholders. We will have a cricket indaba under CSA where you find that now we're starting to look back on the last 5 years and also projecting where we're going in the next 5 years. So part of their mandate as well is to make sure that all those issues are happening. And like I said, I think the issue which is very vital, this commission wouldn't be here if everything was rosy. So,
but Mr. Khoza, in your affidavit, you in paragraph 85 set out various powers that the Transformation Committee has. Can you take us through that, please?
Correct, Chair. I think the transformation must meet twice a year, and this is within the terms of reference and has the powers, among others, to consider and make decisions on. The need to review and investigate any activities relevant to transformation, and that will speak at CSA level or at member level, and also consult with or seek information, if required, from any employee of CSA who shall be obliged to cooperate with the Transformation Committee. So like I said earlier on, as a Cricket Services Department, we also have our moment where we get put in front of the Transformation Committee and we need to give an objective and reports in terms of how we're progressing against certain aspects. Also, they have the powers to access all records, and including facilities or any resources necessary to discharge their responsibilities, because they are equally accountable as far as making sure that we are moving in this path. And they also make recommendations to the board. So the Transformation Chair at every board meeting will have to give a report to the board about the events and activities within the transformation aspect.
With reference to paragraphs 8, sorry.
Mr. Khoza, sorry, I hope I don't take you off course in terms of your structure, but if you had to be more specific about where CSA has fallen short in terms of transformation, what would you say are the areas that CSA has fallen short in?
I would say probably monitoring and evaluation is key. Although we have mechanisms in place to monitor and evaluate, the challenging thing is that you cannot be everywhere to look at the intensity of your objectives and your strategy. So hence it's quite important that probably if we had an oversight committee like a transformation committee at member level, could assist in facilitating those issues at that member. Because CSA is only as strong as their members. So if the cricket is not played at head office, it's played at member level. So if the members are not strong enough and we're not making sure that we support them, and that's where we're going to come short. And I think out of the members that we have, I think only 3 have transformation committees. I think Mr. Jordan might have mentioned this. So we should have made sure that we're intentional about the establishment of these committees. And I think that's where the failure comes in, because this is not just a subcommittee. It's an oversight of the cricket ecosystem, whether it's from a business perspective, whether it's from a governance perspective, whether it's from a cricketing perspective.
Mr. Khoza, you, in response to my question about whether you agree that transformation has spectacularly failed, you do say that you accept that you have fallen short in respect of transformation. But as I understand it, from paragraphs 87 and 88 of your affidavit, you do seem to be suggesting that even though Cricket South Africa is not where it is on the transformation front, there has been some progress. Is that a correct reading of your affidavit? And if so, just tell us why you say that.
It's not where it should be.
It-
I think you wanted to say it
Yeah,
is not
it's
where
not where
it should be.
but it has
It
made
is.
some progress.
Yes.
So, do you agree with that? And if you do, just tell us why you say Cricket South Africa has made progress.
Chair, you know, the significant issue is that you have to start from somewhere with other aspects. And where I speak about progress is that now we're starting to see results at various levels of our game. And yeah, predominantly we're speaking contracting and other aspect. That at least we're now having more options of suitably performing players that actually warrant to be able to get this contracts and all that. And the significant impact of that is surely because of the structures and systems that have been put into gear. Because that improvement wouldn't have happened if we haven't had some of the progress. But we cannot be satisfied in terms of where we are, because there's still a lot of issues that we still have to work on. There's still a lot of investment that is required to try and make sure that we can change the face of cricket. And when I say the face of cricket, I'm more speaking about that is truly representative and that it appeals to that relevancy of the majority. And that's where our transformation plan speaks to, that relevancy. And that's why all our efforts is that we are making strides, but we're not where we need to be, where we can say we're relevant to people out there.
In paragraph 87, you set out certain statistics regarding the composition of the Proteas men's team.
Mr. Musaji, just before you go ahead, I am not so sure that you have answered what Mr. Musaji wanted you to answer. He says there is a claim that CSA's transformation policy has spectacularly failed. You don't disagree, but I am not so sure that you answer what I think Mr. Musaji would want to hear about the qualification of that failure.
Correct, Chair. I think what Mr. Musaji is alluding to is the effect on what's happening within point 87 of the affidavit in relation to the progress that have been made throughout the years. And I think when you look at that from a 2015-2016 perspective, when you look at the national main team, 39% of the players were black, of which 11% were black African. And that whole report from 2016, you'll see that we've improved the numbers from 56% black, 18% black African. And in 2017-2018, you'll see that we've moved to 51% black and 20% black African. That is also speaks to retirement of other significant players. But the issue which it speaks to, I'm saying now, as much as the stats are there, they're nowhere near in terms of where the CSA transformation plan in terms of relevancy comes in. And I don't want to be misunderstood in that aspect. The spectacular failure of that is that now we are not where we need to be, and we need to acknowledge that.
Okay.
Mr. Khoza, is there a particular reason why paragraph 87 doesn't give us the complete picture? Because I do understand you point out the number or the percentage of black Africans that are part of the Proteas team over the years, but it's not a complete picture of the team, and I think it would assist us if you could identify the percentage of each race group.
I think when you look at the, for example, 50% black, it will tell you that the other 50% are white. And then it goes down further, it breaks down the 50% black to say, of the 50%, for example, 20% equates to black African. So maybe what we can also provide that avenue to you.
Okay,
I think just an arithmetic exercise will get you there anyway, because if, for example, in 87.1 you had 39% of the players that were black, 61% would be white, and of the black, 11% is black African. It must mean that 28% would then be Indian and coloured. But certainly, if you require a breakdown, we can provide that breakdown to you.
That's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite an engaging exercise, you know. On the one hand, you don't want to reduce this entire exercise to a bean counting exercise. You would want to see an evolution of this transformative, exercise in ways that do not undermine its positive objective. We certainly do not want to go to splitting hair about whether we're talking about quotas or whether we're talking about targets, though those differentials are critically important, just so that we understand what is being done here. I'm just as you are responding to us, I'm thinking about that. Because I think there was a time in the course of these hearings where it appeared that there was just an abuse of the so-called quota system, which seemed not to take into account whether, performance was essential in the way in which there was a selection of players.
No, Chair, that is acknowledged. I think the key issue for me is for the greater public out there also and the stakeholders to always bring this issue around sustainability, relevance, as well as making sure that we can be competitive. I think if all of us collectively, whether it's the business world out there in the government, we could probably put all our efforts, we probably will be able to ensure that we can sustain this beautiful game.
Yes.
On the question of sustainability, presumably sustainability is not only related to the question of the demographics of the team, but there's a lot more that goes into sustainability. Because if, for example, you have a team that is representative, truly representative, and majority black, for example, but you have a team that's not performing, does that have any impact on sustainability?
It does, Chair. I mean, at the end of the day, we must always understand that at the international level, our funding model heavily revolves around the successful Protea team. So it will be false of me to say it doesn't. It does. Because if the Protea team is successful while transforming, it actually appeals to the relevancy that I'm speaking about. But the key issue here is to get to a Protea level, you also need a base to work with. And Chair, I think the issue which is very vital is the state that people are not well aware, is that 65% of our facilities where we're developing cricket belongs to the municipalities. And cricket is not immune from what's happening within communities.
Don't start us on municipalities.
We're going to get there, Mr. Koza, you deal with that later. But in fairness, I should also then put to you, if you have, for example, an all-white team that's performing well, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a sustainable team.
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't speak to our strategy. I must say, the greater majority are black people. As much as there's challenges in terms of trying to transform the game in all those type of issues because unintended consequences of the past and even currently now in terms of access to resources, CSA has done reasonably well in terms of what they can manage now and with the resources that they have now. But that doesn't mean we should fold our arms and say we're happy with it. Because intentionally, we need to strive for more. Because the little bit of hanging fruits and success we've seen, and that will be touched on when I speak about the programs, it tells me that we're onto something here, which will probably later on will result in ensuring that we can have that representative winning Proteas team that everybody can see relevancy in.
Mr. Koza, you acknowledge in your statement that CSA still has some way to go towards achieving transformation goals. And then you deal with a very critical issue that impacts on transformation. Can you take us through that issue?
Like I said, I think earlier on before it was stopped, was the issue around the infrastructure.
Nobody was stopping you.
Like I said,
we're going to get to infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay, but look at what you say in paragraph 89 of your affidavit.
Correct.
Which my understanding is it's not
Mr.
limited to...
You keep on taking us back.
You deal with what I would call the elephant in the room that has had an impact on transformation.
Correct.
Take us through that.
Chair, I think most of the people have came forward here, and especially whether it's former players, whether unfortunately the current players haven't came to the fore. So, and that's one of the key issues that you cannot even put in the defensive mechanism and say maybe now it's not happening. Because one of the key issues that we're taking away, I think, is the issue around the time given for black players to play.
Well,
because
let me just say this so that it is in the public knowledge as well. Current players were invited, and human beings being who they are, those who responded indicated that they would like to come, but I should guarantee that there would be no victimization. I'm just a poor advocate. I can't guarantee that. So I had to say to them, look, unfortunately, I can't give that guarantee. So, because I also would have loved to have heard what their issues are, and I mean, the eternal optimist that I am, they probably would have said some of the things that you are saying, to say, look, things in 2021 are totally different to what they were, certainly in 1991, certainly in 2001. But I don't have the benefit thereof, because I would have loved to hear the voices of the current players. But I'm sorry to have interrupted.
No issues, Chair. I think it's good that Mr. Musaji has just reminded me on this important aspect of the testimony, because it's a takeaway. You know, in reflection, when you're administering the game, like I said, you are faced with certain issues that you find that you're addressing at that particular time. But when you hear from the different perspective, you have to listen. And you ask yourself, what is it that these other people are seeing which I'm not seeing? And one of the key issues is what we're highlighting here. Because it's one thing to contract people to make up the squad makeup. But if that doesn't relate to them playing in the format of their strength, then we're fooling ourselves. Then we shouldn't be contracting those players. Because transformation mustn't be equated to dropping of standards because of players are not being given an opportunity to play. I think each and every one of the nationally contracted players by Cricket South Africa is being identified specifically to probably based on their strength for that particular format. And the issue which is very vital is now we will have to go back and relook at this historically to say now, how does it speak to this? And I think, Chair, the other takeaway issue that is very significant, also touching on this point, and I tried to listen to all the players, and I feel their grievance and all those type of issues. The issue that we found that we have now, for example, and that's why I'm trying to balance then and now. So for every tour, for example, that the national team embarks on, whether men or women, or every camp that we have, we normally do a survey, and it's an anonymous survey just to diagnose a few aspects. And an aspect will be the team environment and all the support that they got given, the comfortability of their logistical arrangements, the support that they get given in relation to preparation, selection discussions that could have happened, and all those type of issues. So now, normally what we do with those type of surveys when they come back, when there are issues that are flagged, we actually use it to try and improve the environment or get into conversations, for example, if coaching has been raised as an issue. What I'm getting into is that I'm not sure whether it's the perception that I got here, but it seems like when the players are in the moment or in the zone or contracted at the time, there is that fear, like you're referring to, which is very unfortunate probably to come out and speak their minds about certain things, which is something that we have to look into to say, now, how can we improve this? Because you expect that at that moment, it's my moment. If there's something that discomforts me about my moment, I should be sound enough to be able to raise my issues and say, now, there is a problem here, and CSA, you must address it. But when it happens after a playing stage of a player, it's quite sad for me, because we're not given an opportunity to rectify at that moment, which means that player was robbed of a fair, meaningful career where you found that he could have contributed more if those issues were addressed.
Yes.
You then?
Sorry. Does CSA have any structures in place to then protect players who would, or current players that would, say, speak out against whatever form of discrimination or unfair treatment that they're experiencing?
I think for myself, that's where room for improvement is at. And I think it's something that we must go back and speak to the players and reassure them. Because there's always been an issue of mistrust and maybe misplaced perceptions about the player versus CSA type of a scenario. And that's one of the painful things when you sit at the early stages of the testimonies of the players, to sit back as an administrator for that fact to say, hang on, only if I could have been in that era, maybe I could have contributed more. But the issue which is very vital, I need to take that and benchmark it against what's happening now. But also don't have the comfort to say everything is okay. Because sometimes when you engage these players, remember, it's their income. So they're probably thinking that if I say something which goes against the tie, somehow next year I'm not getting contracted and this will be used against me. So we need to make sure that that reassuring mechanism is something that we need to look into as a system.
Mr. Koza, you then, in paragraph 90, deal with additional factors that need to be addressed to help improve transformation. Just broadly talk about that, because you do go into the specifics later.
I think, Chair, let me start first by the issue of the infrastructure, because it looks like it's one of those passionate issues of mine. Because I realize that you cannot transform this game and create the real access if the infrastructure is lacking. But
before you respond, I don't know if this would not be a convenient time to take the lunch adjournment.
Happy to do that, Chair.
Yes. I think you should keep in mind your answer at 12:59 for you to be ready to take off from there when we come back. How much time do we need for lunch?
I'm in your hands, Chair.
We were moving very fast at some point, and then somewhere we.
Well, you see, we were grabbed by the enthusiasm of all of us, including the witness, who was passionate about this subject. Mr. July, you know, I'm an elderly person. You know. This
You had your hours.
Hey, shall we compromise on 13:45?
Perfect.
happy, sir.
45 minutes.
And please that will allow me to go back to the office and do some work.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
That's your story and you're sticking by it.
Definitely.